Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Dark Fears family. Tonight, we're leaving behind the safety of cities and highways and stepping into the heart of small towns. Places that look quiet on the outside, rows of houses, friendly faces, familiar streets. But behind closed doors, the shadows run deeper than the woods that surround them. Let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered what secrets your town is hiding? What if the people you wave to every morning aren't who they appear to be? I'll tell you a story. In a town not far from here, a boy went missing after riding his bike home from school. Neighbors claimed they saw him pedaling down the street, smiling, carefree, but he never made it home. His bike was later found leaning perfectly against a tree, like someone had carefully placed it there. The strange thing? The tree stood at the edge of the cemetery, and fresh handprints, small, muddy, and childlike, covered its trunk. And that's just one of many horrors buried in these quiet places. Tonight, I'll share with you 10 new, most disturbing true small-town horror stories. So grab a blanket, dim the lights, and join me on this journey into the darkness. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss another night with the Dark Fears family. My name is Daniel, and this happened when I was 19 years old. I grew up in a small town called Mill Creek, a place with one diner, a gas station, and streets so quiet at night you could hear dogs barking 3 blocks away. Nothing much ever happened there. At least, that's what everyone believed. But Mill Creek had a secret. The story goes that every few years, strange lights would appear along the edge of the woods. Some said they were swamp gas. Others whispered about spirits of miners who had died decades ago in a collapsed shaft. But no one ever got too close. Until I did. It was late fall, the air sharp and cold. My friends dared me to follow the lights after they appeared again near the old train tracks. I laughed it off, but when I saw them myself, pale, floating orbs weaving through the trees, I felt something pull at me. Curiosity, fear, both. That night, I decided I'd go alone. I left my house around 11:30 p.m., flashlight in hand, and cut across the empty baseball field toward the woods. The town was asleep. Even the diner's neon sign was dark, which never happened. The silence felt heavier than usual, like the whole place was holding its breath. As I neared the tree line, I saw them. 3 lights, floating about 6 feet off the ground, swaying like lanterns held by invisible hands. My first thought was that someone was pulling a prank, maybe kids from school. But the lights didn't behave like flashlights. They drifted in perfect unison, almost like they were leading me deeper. I told myself I'd only go a few feet in, just enough to prove I wasn't scared. But the deeper I walked, the quieter it became. No crickets, no wind. Even the sound of my own footsteps seemed swallowed by the trees. When I turned back, the field was gone. Panic surged through me when I realized the baseball field was gone. I spun in circles, shining my flashlight around, but all I saw were endless trees. My stomach dropped. I hadn't walked far enough to lose sight of the clearing. Something was wrong. The lights pulsed brighter, almost mocking me, and then began to drift again, deeper into the woods. Against all reason, I followed. Each step I took felt heavier, like the ground itself wanted to hold me back. My breath fogged in front of me, but the air had grown warmer, damp. After what felt like an hour, I stumbled into a clearing. In the center stood an old wooden shack, its roof sagging, boards rotting. The lights circled above it like moths, then vanished, plunging me into darkness. That's when I heard it. Footsteps inside. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze. My flashlight trembled in my hand as the footsteps creaked closer to the door. Then silence. Nothing. I forced myself to whisper, "Hello?" The shack answered with a long, painful groan as the front door creaked open on its own. My light caught movement inside. A figure, small and hunched, retreating into the shadows. My heart hammered in my chest, but I couldn't make myself run. I stepped onto the porch, the wood bending under my weight. The smell hit me immediately. Damp earth and rot like something long buried. Inside, the shack was almost empty. Just broken furniture, scraps of fabric, and the faint sound of dripping water. But then I noticed something carved into the far wall. Dozens of handprints. Small, childlike, all smeared deep into the wood, as if pressed there with mud or blood. And among them, one fresh, wet handprint slid down the wall. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my flashlight. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but when I turned toward the door, the figure was there. Not close, just standing at the far end of the shack. Its outline was all wrong. Shoulders too broad, limbs too thin, head tilted unnaturally to the side. The beam of my flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw its face, or what was left of it. Sunken eyes, mouth stretched too wide, skin gray and cracked like dried clay. It didn't move, but the sound of breathing filled the room, ragged, wet. Then the lights returned, those floating orbs, swarming the figure, and as they circled, its body twitched, bending at angles that should have broken bones. The air grew suffocatingly hot, my ears ringing with a low hum that made me dizzy. I did the only thing I could. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket as I bolted out of the shack and into the woods. My flashlight's beam jerked wildly, throwing shadows that looked like clawed hands reaching for me. But no matter how far I ran, the humming followed. Low, vibrating through the ground itself, rattling in my teeth. I stopped to catch my breath, bent over with my hands on my knees. The woods around me were black, silent, endless. And then I saw it, one of the orbs, floating just ahead. It blinked once, like an eye, then darted between the trees. Against every instinct, I chased it. Something inside me whispered that if I didn't follow, I'd never get out. The orb led me down a narrow path I swear hadn't been there before. Roots twisted like veins, and the air smelled of wet iron. When I stumbled into another clearing, my stomach dropped. The ground was littered with bicycles. Dozens of them. Rusted, bent, tangled together in a heap. I recognized some of those bikes. A red Schwinn with a missing seat. A green mountain bike that belonged to a kid from my street. He vanished 3 summers ago. Parents said he ran away. But here was his bike, rusted and broken. My chest tightened. I backed away, but the ground beneath me gave a hollow thud. I looked down and saw a square of rotting wood half buried in the dirt. A trap door. The orb hovered directly above it, waiting. Shaking, I dropped to my knees and pulled the wood open. The stench hit me first. Decay, thick and sour. My flashlight beam revealed a staircase leading into darkness. Something wet dripped from the ceiling. And below, faint but unmistakable, was the sound of children laughing. My skin crawled. It wasn't playful laughter. It was broken, jagged, like something imitating a child but getting it horribly wrong. Still, something stronger than fear tugged me forward. The stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, the laughter growing louder, overlapping into a chorus that seemed to come from all directions. My flashlight flickered, the beam struggling against the suffocating black. The staircase ended in a wide underground chamber. The walls were stone, slick with moisture. Strange carvings lined them, spirals, stick figures, shapes I didn't recognize, all smeared dark. But what froze me in place were the figures crouched along the edges of the room. Children. Or at least, they looked like children. Their skin was pale, stretched thin, eyes glassy and unblinking. They rocked back and forth in perfect unison, humming that same low tone I'd heard outside. In the center of the chamber stood the figure from the shack, its limbs twisted and jerking, head lolling as if its neck had snapped long ago. The orb circled it faster and faster, casting warped shadows across the walls. Then all the children turned their heads toward me at once. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. The children rose slowly, their joints cracking, movements stiff as though their bones weren't quite right. Their humming grew louder, vibrating in my skull, making me dizzy. The twisted figure in the center let out a sound I can't describe. It was somewhere between a growl and the screech of metal tearing apart. The orb suddenly shot outward, weaving between the children, and then circled me. Their light blinded me, searing into my eyes. In that blinding glow, I saw flashes. Faces of missing kids from Mill Creek, their eyes wide with terror, mouths open in silent screams. They weren't just gone. They were here, trapped, bound to whatever this thing was. The humming reached a painful pitch, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the baseball field again, my flashlight beside me, the woods quiet as if nothing had happened. But something was different. My hands. They were smeared with small, muddy prints. I stumbled home in a daze, scrubbing my hands raw in the sink. But the prints wouldn't fade. For weeks afterward, I tried to convince myself it was a nightmare. But Mill Creek had other plans. At night, I'd wake to the sound of children's laughter outside my window. Some mornings, I found small, muddy handprints smeared across the glass. My parents never heard a thing, only me. One evening, I walked past the diner and saw a missing poster taped to the window. A boy named Caleb, last seen riding his bike near the train tracks. The date was 2 days ago. That night, the lights returned outside my house. 3 glowing orbs floating silently at the edge of the woods, waiting. I don't go out after dark anymore. But sometimes, when the house is still and the laughter starts up again, I feel my legs moving on their own, pulling me toward the window, like the lights aren't finished with me yet. And maybe, one night soon, I won't be able to stop myself. My name is Claire, and I'll never forget what happened the summer I turned 22. I lived in a quiet town called Willow Ridge, one of those places where the nights are so still. You can hear the hum of the street lights and the rustle of leaves blocks away. I worked the late shift at a diner, and walking home after midnight became routine. The streets were empty, safe, or at least that's what I thought. But one night, I noticed something that made me uneasy. Under the lone street light at the corner of Maple Avenue stood a man. Tall, thin, his posture rigid. He didn't move, didn't even shift his weight, just stood there, staring straight ahead. I crossed the street to avoid him, my footsteps echoing too loud on the pavement. When I glanced back, my heart nearly stopped. He hadn't turned his head, but I knew his eyes were on me. For the next week, the man was there every night when I walked home. Always under the same street light, always motionless. I tried to convince myself he was harmless, maybe just a lonely drifter. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, I worked later than usual. By the time I closed up, it was nearly 2 a.m. The streets were darker, quieter. As I neared Maple Avenue, I felt my chest tighten. The light was on. And yes, he was there. But this time, something was different. He wasn't facing straight ahead. He was turned toward me, his head tilted down, like he'd been waiting. My stomach twisted as I forced myself to keep walking, refusing to look at him. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps behind me. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. At first, I thought I was imagining the footsteps. Maybe it was just the echo of my own. But when I stopped, they didn't. They kept coming, slow and steady, dragging like heavy boots scraping against pavement. I forced myself to glance back. The man was no longer under the streetlight. He was halfway down the block, his tall frame jerking unnaturally with each step, as though his joints weren't bending the way they should. His face was hidden in shadow, but his head was locked on me. I whispered to myself, "Don't run. Don't run," but my body betrayed me. My legs bolted, pounding against the sidewalk as I sprinted toward home. My keys rattled in my hand, slick with sweat. Behind me, the footsteps quickened. Not running, not quite, but faster, heavier, closing in. By the time I reached my street, I risked one last glance. He wasn't there. The sidewalk stretched empty, the streetlight flickering in the distance. But I could still hear the footsteps. I slammed my front door shut, twisting the locks with trembling hands. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the wood, listening. Silence. Nothing outside but the chirp of crickets. Maybe I was losing my mind. I peered through the curtains. The street was empty, bathed in pale moonlight. No man, no footsteps. I tried to laugh it off, but it stuck in my throat. Something told me he wasn't gone. That night, I left every light in the house on and barely slept. At 3 a.m., I woke to a faint buzzing sound. It wasn't my phone. It wasn't the fridge. It was coming from outside. I crept to the window. There he was, standing perfectly still under the streetlight, directly across from my house. His face finally visible in the glow. His skin was pale, stretched too tight, like parchment pulled over bone. His mouth hung open just slightly, though he wasn't breathing. His eyes were nothing but black, and yet, I swear, I could feel him smiling. I shut the curtains so hard the rod nearly came loose. My hands shook as I backed away, but the buzzing grew louder, like static pressing against the walls of my house. I covered my ears, but the sound was inside my head now, a vibration crawling into my skull. Suddenly, every light in the house flickered. Once, twice, then went out. My heart leapt into my throat. I scrambled for my phone flashlight, the small glow barely cutting through the pitch-black rooms. And then came the knock, slow, heavy, deliberate, 3 times. I froze in the hallway, my phone trembling in my hand. The knock came again, louder this time, rattling the frame of the front door. My throat went dry. When I finally gathered the courage to look through the peephole, my stomach turned to ice. He wasn't outside on the porch. He was inside the house, standing under the hallway light, directly beneath me. I stumbled back from the peephole, my phone slipping from my sweaty hand and clattering on the floor. The glow spun across the walls, catching only glimpses of him, his shadow stretching impossibly long down the hallway. He didn't move, just stood there, his head tilted upward as though he knew I was watching from above. The static buzz grew louder, pressing into my skull until I thought I'd go mad. I forced myself to crawl toward the bathroom, locking the door behind me. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. My phone light flickered, dimming until I was left in near darkness. Then came the creak, floorboards bending under heavy weight, slow, measured steps climbing the stairs. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying not to breathe. The footsteps stopped outside the bathroom door. And then, the doorknob began to turn. I braced my body against the door, gripping the handle to keep it from turning. My arms trembled with effort, but the knob twisted violently, jerking side to side with unnatural strength. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. I dared to hope he was gone. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A faint glow seeped from beneath the bathroom door, like light spilling in from the hallway. But it wasn't warm, yellow light. It was pale, sickly. The same glow I'd seen under the streetlight. The buzzing returned, louder than ever, rattling the pipes, the mirror, even my teeth. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I fell to the floor, clutching my head. Through the haze, I swore I saw shadows moving against the walls. Not just his, dozens of them. Thin, stretched shapes, twitching like static figures caught in an old television screen. When I opened my eyes, the glow was gone. The house was silent again. But I wasn't alone. I couldn't stay in that bathroom forever. Gripping my phone like a weapon, I pushed the door open. The hallway was empty, silent, the buzzing gone. Step by step, I crept downstairs, every nerve screaming. The living room lights flickered weakly, buzzing before dying out again. Through the window, I could see the streetlight across the road, but it was no longer just one man standing beneath it. There were more. 5, 6, 10 tall figures, each motionless, faces hidden in the shadows. Their bodies were identical, as if they'd been copied and pasted into reality. All of them facing my house. My breath hitched. I stumbled back, bumping into the couch. That's when I saw movement in the corner of the room. The original one, taller, closer. His black eyes locked on me. And this time, he smiled. I bolted for the back door, fumbling with the lock until it snapped open. The cool night air hit me as I ran barefoot into the yard, heart slamming against my ribs. My only thought was escape, just get away from the house, from those things. But when I reached the fence line, I froze. The street was wrong. The entire neighborhood was wrong. The houses looked warped, twisted at strange angles, their windows black holes staring back at me. And under every single street light stood one of them. Dozens now, stretching into the distance. All identical, all staring, their heads cocked at that same unnatural angle. My stomach churned as I realized what had happened. I hadn't escaped. I had stepped directly into their world. Behind me, the original figure's footsteps crunched closer on the grass. The buzzing grew unbearable, drowning out every thought in my head. Then a voice whispered, low and broken, right behind me. "You belong here now. I don't remember what happened next." I woke up in my bed the following morning, sunlight streaming through the window as if nothing had happened. My phone lay on the nightstand, its battery full. My house was normal again. But things aren't normal. Not really. Every night, without fail, the street light across from my house flickers. And when it does, he's there. The same tall figure, standing motionless, watching. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the others too, lurking farther down the street. I've tried to move. I've tried to stay somewhere else. It doesn't matter. Wherever I go, there's always a streetlight nearby. And when it flickers, I know he'll be waiting. I've stopped walking home late at night. I don't go near windows after dark. But sometimes, when the house is silent and the buzzing starts in the walls, I remember his words. "You belong here now." And I wonder if one night I'll finally step outside and never come back. My name is Rebecca, and this happened when I was 21 years old. During the summer, I stayed with my aunt in a small town called Hallows Creek. She lived at the very edge of town, near a long stretch of woods. Everyone there knew of the house at Miller's End, though nobody dared go near it. It was one of those places you heard whispered about at the diner or gas station. The kind of house children dared each other to run up and touch before sprinting away. The house itself sat at the end of a dirt road that had once been busy before families started moving out. It leaned slightly to the left, its roof missing shingles, its windows covered in grime. My aunt always told me, "Stay away from that place." Bad things live there. I thought she was just being dramatic, until I saw the light. One night, while walking home, I noticed a single lamp glowing in the upstairs window of Miller's house. But that house had been abandoned for decades. The night I saw the light, I froze on the road, staring up at the second floor. The glow wasn't flickering like a candle. It was steady, like an old oil lamp. I told myself it was just a reflection, maybe headlights bouncing off glass. But there were no cars on that lonely road. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and a voice in my head whispered, "Someone is inside." The next day, I asked around. An older man at the gas station chuckled bitterly when I mentioned Miller's End. He said the last family to live there disappeared in the 1950s. Parents, 3 children, all gone without a trace. Since then, people swore they saw shadows in the windows, or heard a piano playing from inside at night, even though the house had no electricity. My curiosity should have ended there, but it didn't. That night, I stayed up late, peering out my aunt's bedroom window that overlooked the dirt road. And sure enough, at exactly midnight, the upstairs light flicked on again. This time, I swore I saw the shadow of a figure pass by the window. My chest tightened. Someone, or something, was walking those halls. By the third night, I couldn't help myself. Curiosity gnawed at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. I waited until my aunt had gone to bed, then slipped outside with only a flashlight in hand. The summer air was heavy and humid, cicadas screaming in the trees as I made my way down the dirt road. The house loomed larger with every step, its broken shutters rattling in the faint wind. When I reached the gate, I noticed something strange. The weeds and grass surrounding the path were tall and wild everywhere, except for the walkway leading up to the front door. The dirt there was packed down, as if someone had been walking across it regularly. My hand shook as I pushed the gate open. It groaned on rusted hinges, the sound echoing through the silence. I climbed the porch steps and pressed my palm against the wooden door. It was cold, unnaturally cold for a summer night. For a second, I thought I heard faint music from inside. A piano. Slow, mournful notes drifting just beneath the creaks of the house. My chest tightened, and a chill ran through me. And then, suddenly, the music stopped. I don't know what possessed me, but I turned the knob. To my shock, the door wasn't locked. It swung open with a long, aching creak that seemed to echo through the empty night. The air inside smelled of mildew and rot, but beneath it lingered something sweeter, like old perfume clinging to forgotten curtains. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight across the entryway. Dust coated everything, yet I noticed faint footprints on the floorboards, leading toward the staircase. The prints weren't fresh, but they weren't decades old either. Someone had been here. The silence was unbearable. Every time my foot touched the wood, the floor groaned loud enough to wake the dead. My light flickered across the walls, catching peeling wallpaper, cracked picture frames, and what looked like a child's toy, an old wooden horse, sitting upright in the corner. The air grew colder the farther I walked. I swear I could see my breath, even though it was the middle of July. Then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it again. The piano. The sound drifted from upstairs. Low, slow notes, as if someone pressed the keys with deliberate patience. Against every instinct in my body, I began to climb the stairs. The stairs moaned beneath my weight, each step threatening to collapse. Halfway up, I felt a draft sweep down the hall, carrying with it that same perfume scent, sweet, floral, almost suffocating. My flashlight trembled in my grip as I reached the landing. The upstairs hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with closed doors. The piano music was louder now, echoing faintly through the silence, as though the notes themselves seeped through the walls. I walked slowly, shining my light on each door. Most were covered in dust, their handles rusted. But one door at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar. That's where the music came from. As I approached, the floor creaked beneath me, and the piano abruptly stopped. My heart lurched into my throat. Whoever or whatever had been playing knew I was there. For several seconds, I stood frozen, staring at the dark gap between the door and the frame. Then, in the quiet, I heard it. Faint breathing, not my own. Deep, slow, steady breaths. It was just behind that door. I pushed the door open, my hand trembling so badly the flashlight beams shook across the room. What I saw made my stomach drop. Inside was a grand, dust-covered piano sitting in the center of the room. The keys were yellowed with age, several cracked. Yet I swore I had heard them just seconds ago. The smell of perfume was overwhelming here, thick in the air. But what froze me wasn't the piano. It was the chair in front of it. The wooden bench sat pulled back slightly, as if someone had just stood up from playing. And resting on the seat was something impossible. A fresh handprint. Small, delicate, pressed into the layer of dust. I backed away, trying to rationalize, when the lid of the piano slammed shut with a deafening crash. The sound reverberated through the house. My flashlight flickered, and in that split second of darkness, I thought I saw someone standing beside the piano. A woman in a long dress, her face obscured by shadow. When the light steadied, she was gone. I stumbled backward into the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My instinct screamed at me to run, but when I turned toward the staircase, I froze. At the far end of the hall, a figure stood motionless. It was a woman. Her dress looked decades out of place, lace and fabric stained and torn. Her hair hung long and dark, covering most of her face. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice cracking. No response. I blinked, and she was gone. I sprinted for the stairs, but halfway down the house, groaned violently, like the walls themselves were shifting. The steps beneath me vibrated, dust shaking loose from the ceiling. I nearly fell before catching myself on the railing. Then came the sound, a child's laugh, high-pitched, echoing through the empty house, bouncing off the walls. I spun in circles, shining my flashlight everywhere, but nothing was there. Only the laugh, growing louder, followed by more footsteps above me, running back and forth. Something wasn't letting me leave. I bolted down the stairs and crashed into the front door, but when I twisted the knob, it wouldn't budge. I yanked, slammed my shoulder against it, but it was stuck as if nailed shut. Behind me, the piano began playing again. Slow, deliberate keys pressed one after another. I spun around, heart racing, and saw the faint glow of light descending the stairs. Not a flashlight, not natural. Something was coming down after me. I darted into the nearest room, slamming the door and pressing my back against it. My flashlight beam revealed a parlor filled with broken furniture and shattered glass. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall, and in its reflection, I saw movement. The woman, standing just behind me. I turned, but the room was empty. The mirror cracked further, splitting her image into jagged fragments until it collapsed onto the floor. The sound was deafening, like the house itself had screamed. Then, silence again. I couldn't take it anymore. I ran from the parlor, back into the entryway. The piano stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving only the thundering of my heartbeat. The door still wouldn't move, so I rushed to a window. The glass was grimy but intact. I smashed the butt of my flashlight against it. It didn't crack. I hit it again and again until my arms ached. But the glass held like steel. And then I heard it, whispering from every direction. Soft voices overlapping, some crying, some laughing, some muttering words I couldn't understand. They filled the house, echoing off the walls, circling me like vultures. I dropped the flashlight, covering my ears, screaming for them to stop. And in that moment, every window in the house lit up. A blinding golden glow radiated from inside, flooding the darkness outside. The voices silenced. For a second, everything was calm. And then, I heard the piano one last time. A sharp, discordant note that rattled through my bones. The next thing I remember, I was lying outside on the dirt road, staring up at the night sky. My flashlight was still clutched in my hand, though the batteries were dead. My clothes smelled faintly of dust and perfume. The house stood in silence, completely dark, as if nothing had happened. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. When I told my aunt, she turned pale and refused to speak of it. Later, I learned that Miller's End wasn't just abandoned. It was cursed. They say the family who disappeared was never found because they never left. Their spirits linger in those walls, forever replaying the final moments of their lives, trapped between notes of a piano and the whispers of their unfinished story. To this day, I can't hear piano music without breaking into a cold sweat. I'll never forget that house, or the feeling that I was just another guest it didn't want to let go. And if you ever drive through Hallows Creek and see a faint light glowing in the window of the house at Miller's End, don't stop. My name is Thomas, and this story takes me back to the summer of 1999. I was driving cross-country for work, trying to make it from Ohio to Denver in 2 days. By the second night, I was exhausted and found myself on a back highway, the kind where gas stations are 50 miles apart and cell service is non-existent. That's when I saw the sign. A neon arrow buzzed faintly in the darkness, pointing toward a small roadside building, Miller's Rest Motel. The name seemed generic, almost too plain, but I was too tired to care. The parking lot was empty, not a single car in sight. Still, a dim orange light glowed behind the lobby window. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of old cigarettes. The man at the counter barely looked up when I asked for a room. His skin was pale, waxy, and he spoke in a voice so flat it hardly seemed human. "Room 6, he said, handing me a rusted key. Something about him chilled me, but my body begged for rest. I told myself it was just an old, lonely motel. I had no idea the nightmare that waited behind door 6. The hallway to my room was long and narrow, lit by a row of flickering yellow bulbs that hummed like insects. The carpet squished under my shoes as if it had soaked up years of spilled drinks. or worse. The motel felt abandoned, yet every door had a number, and each one seemed to lean slightly inward, like they were listening. Room 6 was halfway down the hall. The door was painted a dull green, the number barely hanging by a nail. I slid the key in and pushed it open. The room smelled faintly of mold and something metallic. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, and the single bed sagged in the middle, its sheets yellowed with age. A TV sat in the corner, unplugged, yet I swore I heard static whispering from it when I walked past. I tried to laugh it off, tossing my bag on the chair. Exhaustion pressed down on me, but as I lay back on the bed, I noticed something unsettling. The phone on the nightstand wasn't connected to any cord. Still, it clicked once, like someone had just picked up the other end. I froze, staring at it, waiting for a sound. But the silence was worse than any voice. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The room felt smaller by the second, as if the walls themselves were breathing. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, exhaustion twisting reality. But then I heard it. A faint scraping, like nails against wood, coming from the bathroom. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound stopped, then started again, slower this time, deliberate. My hand hovered over the doorknob. I told myself to ignore it, to stay in the bed. But curiosity, or fear, pushed me forward. I cracked the bathroom door open. Nothing. Just the same cracked tiles, the grimy mirror, and the flickering light overhead. But in the reflection of the mirror, I saw something move behind me. I spun around. The room was empty. I leaned back toward the mirror and froze again. The reflection wasn't mine. It was a pale, featureless face staring back at me, its mouth opening slightly, though no sound came. A wave of nausea hit me, and I stumbled backward, nearly falling onto the bed. The phone on the nightstand clicked again, this time twice, echoing in the room like a heartbeat. I tried to leave the bathroom, but the door slammed shut behind me, rattling in its frame. My heart raced as I yanked on it. It didn't budge. The phone clicked again, 3 times this time, and the static from the unplugged TV began to hum. Low at first, then rising in a piercing crescendo. I spun toward the TV. The screen, still unplugged, now flickered to life. Static filled the screen, yet through the white noise, I could see shapes. Figures hunched over the bed, standing silently, watching me. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to move. Then the figures stepped closer. I stumbled backward, tripping over the chair and hit the floor hard. The static on the TV grew louder, merging with whispering voices I couldn't understand. They called my name, or at least it sounded like they did. Desperation surged through me. I grabbed the phone and flung it across the room. The clicking stopped immediately. Silence fell. But it was the kind of silence that made the blood drain from your face. I knew I wasn't alone. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed to escape. I reached the door and slammed my shoulder against it again. It cracked, but didn't open. Then I heard it, a whisper from the hallway. "Don't leave." I turned toward the hall. The flickering corridor lights cast long shadows. One by one, the room numbers began to glow faintly, as if the motel itself had come alive. I could see shapes moving behind each door, their silhouettes swaying and twisting in unnatural ways. I ran to the window. The glass didn't break when I struck it, no matter how hard. Behind me, a soft scratching began. Fingernails across wood, circling the room, coming closer and closer. I backed into the far corner. The shapes were now in the room, emerging from the shadows. Pale, faceless, moving without sound. My chest burned, every breath a struggle. Then a low, guttural voice echoed. "Stay. Forever." I sank to the floor, trembling. The static on the TV flared again, filling the room with white noise. Shapes flickered on the walls, dancing, twisting, almost taunting me. Desperation made me scream, and something strange happened. The figures froze, tilting their faceless heads toward me. Then, in unison, they moved toward the bed. The floorboards didn't creak. They floated, silent, deliberate, closer and closer. I felt icy hands brush past my legs, though nothing was there. My vision blurred, the room spinning, and the whispering voices rose to a deafening roar. The world narrowed to one point: the bed. Suddenly, the door burst open. I flung myself out, running down the hallway blindly. The lights flickered, shadows chasing me at the corners of my vision. Behind me, the piano-like keys of static and whispering voices played a mournful, eerie tune. I didn't look back until I reached the lobby. The man at the counter was gone. The neon sign buzzed above, dull and flickering, as if nothing had ever happened. I stumbled outside into the parking lot, gasping for air. The night was unnervingly silent, save for the faint buzz of the neon sign. I didn't stop to grab my bag. I ran toward my car, ignoring the strange sensation that eyes were on me. When I turned the ignition, I dared a glance back. The motel seemed empty, except the window of room 6 glowed faintly. And then I saw them, the faceless figures standing in the shadows around the parking lot, motionless, yet radiating a presence that made my chest tighten. I slammed the car in gear and sped away. But the memory haunted me. Their faces, featureless, pale, yet somehow looking straight through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were following, even as the motel disappeared behind me. That night, I stayed awake at a friend's house, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. Sleep wouldn't come. Even hours later, I could hear the whispering, soft as the wind. "You can't leave." For days, I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, stress. But then I found the motel on an old map, decades out of date. It had been abandoned for 20 years. No records existed of anyone ever renting a room there. I called friends who had driven through the area. None remembered seeing Miller's Rest Motel, and one even swore the road didn't go that far at night. But I know what I saw, and months later, when I drove alone on back highways, sometimes I would catch the faint buzz of a neon sign in the distance, a light flickering in the darkness, and I would hear the whisper, "Stay. Forever." I never go near those roads anymore. I don't travel alone. I never stop at motels on back highways because I know they are waiting and they don't like visitors leaving. Even now, years later, I dream about room 6. I wake up drenched in sweat, hearing faint static in my bedroom, shadows stretching across the walls. I see faceless shapes in the corners of my vision, hear whispering calling my name. I can never forget the smell of the stale air, the cold brush of invisible hands, the sensation that the motel was alive, feeding on fear. I've tried to tell people. They call me paranoid, delusional. But I know the truth. If you're driving alone on a dark highway and see a neon sign glowing in the distance, don't stop. Don't look for a place to sleep. Because somewhere, someone, or something is watching. And it wants you to stay forever. I've never returned to that highway. I don't know if the motel still stands. But sometimes, when the wind is right, I can hear the faint hum of neon buzzing and static whispering in the distance. I warn anyone who will listen. Those who enter the silent motel never truly leave. The room, the figures, the whispering, they follow you. They don't forgive curiosity. And one day, if you're not careful, they will come for you. I survived, but the terror never left. And every night, as I close my eyes, I hear it, soft, insistent, and haunting. Stay forever. My name is Daniel, and this happened when I was 16. I grew up in a small town called Pine Hollow, a place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets didn't stay buried for long, or so I thought. Behind my house stretched dense woods, dark and silent, full of whispers that carried on the wind. One summer evening, I was walking my dog, Max, along the edge of the forest. He stopped abruptly, ears perked, growling low. I followed his gaze and saw it, a figure standing between the trees. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a hiker, but the way it moved was wrong. Stiff, jerky, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. I called out, but it didn't respond. The figure stepped closer, or at least seemed to, though I couldn't tell if it was moving or if the shadows were playing tricks on me. Max barked furiously and tried to pull me away. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming to run. Before I could move, the figure vanished, disappearing into the woods as silently as it had appeared. I told myself it was just a man walking in the trees. But I was wrong. That night, I learned some things in Pine Hollow aren't meant to be seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window made me jump. Max refused to leave my side, growling at corners I couldn't even see. I told myself it was my imagination. After all, the woods had always been spooky, and small towns like Pine Hollow thrived on rumors and ghost stories. The next morning, I found strange tracks at the edge of the forest. They weren't human, at least not entirely. They were tall, thin, with elongated fingers that dug into the dirt. The prints twisted unnaturally, as if the being had bent its legs in ways no human could. My stomach churned. Over the next few days, neighbors mentioned seeing strange things near the woods. Lights that moved without source, shadows that darted between the trees, and in one case, a teenage boy who swore a figure had followed him home. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. The figure from that night returned, appearing closer to my house each evening. I'd watch from my window as it lingered at the tree line, staring with eyes that seemed too black, too empty. It wasn't a person, and it wasn't friendly. By the third night, I could no longer ignore the presence in the woods. I told my parents I was just taking Max for a walk, but I couldn't stop thinking about that figure. Curiosity and fear drove me closer to the edge of the forest than I'd ever dared before. Max growled low as we stepped among the trees. The canopy swallowed the moonlight, and the forest became almost pitch black. Every snapped twig beneath my feet sounded like a gunshot. My breath came in shallow gasps as I crept forward, straining to see through the darkness. Then I saw it. The figure, standing perfectly still in a clearing about 30 feet ahead. Its limbs were unnaturally long, its body thin and rigid. I noticed its head tilt slightly as if it were listening, aware of every move I made. My heart raced, but I couldn't turn away. Slowly, it began to move toward me, not walking, gliding, every step silent, every motion deliberate. Max barked, and the figure stopped, tilting its head again, but did not retreat. A cold wind swept through the trees, carrying whispers I couldn't understand. I realized then that the stories about Pine Hollow's woods were true. Some things weren't meant to be seen or challenged. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. Max growled, hackles raised, but the figure didn't falter. Its black, hollow eyes seemed to pierce me, and a strange sense of dread filled my chest. My legs wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. Then it moved faster. Not running, more like sliding along the forest floor, unnaturally smooth, almost floating. I screamed and grabbed Max's leash, yanking him away, but he resisted, growling at the shadows. The whispers grew louder, circling us. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was insistent, urgent, commanding. My mind screamed to leave, but curiosity and terror pushed me forward. Suddenly, the figure stopped. It tilted its head again, and I noticed the ground near it was littered with objects. Old toys, torn clothes, and broken photographs, all faded and worn. The realization hit me like a punch. These were remnants of past victims. It had been here for decades, collecting, observing. A cold wind swept past, and for the first time, I felt a presence directly behind me. I spun, but there was nothing. Yet the feeling remained, oppressive, like the forest itself was alive and watching. I forced myself to move, dragging Max behind me, deeper into the forest, away from the clearing. Branches clawed at my arms and face as I stumbled over roots, the whispers echoing louder with every step. I could feel the figure following, just out of sight. Then I heard a snap, a branch breaking directly behind me. I whirled, shining my flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. But the cold dread didn't lift. My flashlight flickered as if warning me. Ahead, the forest opened into a small grove. The moonlight illuminated dozens of twisted, humanoid shapes standing silently between the trees. Their eyes, black voids, glimmered faintly. I realized with horror that the figure I'd first seen was not alone. Max barked furiously, yanking the leash. The figures didn't move, yet I felt their attention on me, their awareness suffocating. I turned to retreat, but the path I had taken was gone. The forest had shifted, trees rearranged as though the woods themselves were alive. Panic surged through me. I had walked into something far older and more dangerous than I could comprehend. They weren't just watching. They were hunting. I ran blindly, branches tearing at my clothes. The whispers became intelligible, low chants repeating my name. Max yelped as something brushed past him, too fast, too cold. The figures followed silently, moving like shadows, always at the edge of visibility. Then I tripped and fell into a shallow ditch. Pain shot up my leg, but I couldn't stop. Above me, the figures glided closer, their elongated limbs reaching for me, but never quite touching. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my chest. In the center of the grove, I noticed a mound of earth, oddly circular, surrounded by the trinkets of previous victims. Old toys, small bones, broken photographs. The tallest figure stood atop it, head tilting as if inspecting me. Something inside me snapped. I screamed and scrambled up, realizing that running in the darkness wasn't enough. I needed a plan, any plan, to survive. I remembered a story my grandfather told me about the forest. A legend of spirits that trapped the curious and vanished those who lingered. I had laughed at it then. Now, my entire being screamed that the legend was real. I crawled toward a fallen tree, using it as cover. The tallest figure looked down at me, and I swear I saw a grin stretch across its featureless face, impossibly wide and cruel. Its companions shifted closer, forming a circle. Then something incredible happened. The whispers intensified, overlapping into a deafening chorus, and the mound trembled slightly as if responding to the figures. I realized this wasn't random. It was ritualistic, deliberate, ancient. With no time to think, I leapt from cover and ran toward a faint opening I spotted between the trees. Max followed, barking frantically. The forest seemed endless, yet the opening was real. I could escape if I kept moving. But the figures were faster. Branches tore at my face and arms, roots tripping me repeatedly. The whispers followed, growing louder, turning into unintelligible shrieks. I could feel the cold brush of elongated fingers, always near but never touching. Finally, I burst from the dense trees into a clearing bathed in faint moonlight. There, a small stream glimmered, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I ran straight into it, letting the cold water shock my body awake. Behind me, the figures paused at the edge of the forest, motionless. It was as if the water created a boundary they could not cross. I didn't look back. I ran until the forest ended, and I found myself back on the dirt road leading to Pine Hollow. I collapsed, drenched, shivering, every nerve on fire. The forest behind me was silent, unnervingly so. I wanted to believe it was over. But I was wrong. The next day, I told my parents I had wandered too far. They were concerned, but brushed it off as a teenage adventure. I never mentioned the figures, the mound, or the whispers. Some things aren't meant to be spoken aloud. Yet every night afterward, the dreams came. The forest, the mound, the black-eyed figures watching me from the shadows. I woke sweating, hearing the whispers, feeling the brush of fingers against my arms. Even now, years later, I avoid the woods. I've warned friends and neighbors, but they laugh, assuming I'm exaggerating. But I know the truth. The forest doesn't forget, it doesn't forgive, and it never lets go. One night, I heard Max bark, though he's been dead for years. I glanced out the window and caught a glimpse of a tall figure standing at the edge of the property. Its eyes were empty voids, and its head tilted. I know the forest has found me again. I never returned to Pine Hollow. I moved to the city, hoping distance would protect me. But sometimes, when the wind carries a certain scent, damp earth, pine, and something cold, I feel the whispers brush my ears. I've come to understand that some creatures don't just inhabit forests. They exist where memory and fear linger, following those who saw them. I survived the woods behind Pine Hollow, but part of me remains there, trapped, watched, hunted. If you ever wander near dense woods at night, be cautious. Some shadows move with purpose, and some whispers are not meant to be ignored. The figures of Pine Hollow wait. They have patience older than time itself, and one day they may find you. My name is Emily, and this happened when I was 21. I was on a road trip through rural Pennsylvania, exploring abandoned places for photography. I'd heard rumors of a long-forgotten train station outside the town of Ashwood, a place locals avoided and whispered about, calling it cursed. The station was hidden deep in the woods, overgrown with weeds and rusting tracks. When I arrived, the setting sun cast long shadows over the platform. The air was unnervingly still, almost expectant, as if it had been waiting for me. I stepped onto the cracked platform, camera in hand. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of a loose sign swinging in the wind. The station building was small, boarded up, yet inside, through gaps in the wood, I could see a dim, flickering light. Curiosity won over caution. I pushed open a side door, which groaned loudly. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and decay. Dust hung in the air, disturbed by every step I took. Then I heard it, a faint tapping, rhythmic, coming from the far end of the platform. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't alone. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate. I held my breath, straining to hear over the sound of my own heartbeat. It was coming from the tracks themselves, or at least somewhere very close. I stepped cautiously toward the edge of the platform, camera raised, every nerve on fire. Then I saw it. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the rails, motionless. At first, I thought it was a homeless person, or maybe a lost traveler. But the posture was unnatural, too stiff, too straight, and its head was tilted at an impossible angle. I froze, my chest tightening. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward. Or did it? It seemed to glide, silent, its feet never touching the ground. The air around it grew colder, and I could see my breath puffing in the dim light. My instincts screamed to run, but my curiosity held me rooted in place. A distant train whistle blew, though no tracks led to anywhere now. The boards beneath me creaked, and I realized the station wasn't just abandoned. It was alive, watching, waiting. Something ancient had claimed it, and it did not like intruders. I forced myself to take another step forward, every movement trembling. The figure remained motionless, yet I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and suffocating. My camera shook in my hands, the strap biting into my wrist. Suddenly, a soft, metallic clatter echoed across the tracks, like a train coupling. But there was no train. The shadow shifted, almost imperceptibly, and I realized it had moved closer. My stomach churned. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I couldn't look away. I took another step. The air thickened, damp and cold, smelling of rust and something metallic, blood perhaps. The figure mirrored my movements, keeping pace without sound, gliding over the uneven gravel. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. Then I heard a whisper, soft, almost indistinguishable, yet chilling. "Why are you here?" I spun around, heart racing. No one was there. The forest surrounding the station was silent, unnervingly still. When I turned back, the figure was closer, its face obscured by shadow. Yet I could feel its intent, sharp and relentless. Panic surged. I realized I had stepped into a place that was never meant for living eyes. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on a loose plank. The figure glided closer, silent and relentless. The dim light of the station flickered overhead, casting grotesque shadows that stretched and twisted along the walls. My breath came in ragged gasps. I turned toward the building, hoping to hide inside. But the door slammed shut before I could reach it. The air around me grew icy, frost forming on the rails despite the summer evening. My camera flashed as I tried to capture the figure, but the lens only reflected darkness. Then I noticed the tracks. The rails bent unnaturally, like they were alive, twisting toward the forest. I realized the station wasn't abandoned. It had never been abandoned. Something ancient had claimed it, and it fed on fear. The figure stopped briefly and tilted its head, as if amused. A whisper crawled across my mind. "You shouldn't be here." My heart screamed. I bolted toward the forest edge, Max barking frantically beside me. But the shadows stretched, curling around the platform like fingers. I knew then that the station had no intention of letting me leave. I ran blindly toward the forest, Max yanking on his leash. Branches tore at my clothes, and the whispers followed, now forming a chorus of voices calling my name. Each step felt heavier, the ground uneven and treacherous, yet I couldn't stop. Behind me, the shadowy figure emerged from the platform, moving with unnatural speed. Its limbs stretched impossibly, gliding over obstacles without breaking rhythm. I tripped on a root, falling face first into dirt, and felt an icy brush along my back, fingers long and cold, grazing my skin. I scrambled to my feet, desperation fueling my legs. Up ahead, moonlight glimmered through a clearing. I ran toward it, heart pounding like a drum, praying the shadows wouldn't follow. The clearing opened to an abandoned parking lot. My car sat at the edge, keys dangling in the ignition. Relief surged. But when I glanced back at the forest, the figure stood at the tree line, perfectly still, staring. I jumped into the car, slamming the door. The forest behind the station remained silent, but I knew it was only waiting. I drove recklessly down the dirt road, heart hammering, eyes darting to the tree line. The whispers were gone, but a suffocating presence lingered. I dared not look directly at the forest again. Reaching a main highway, I slowed to catch my breath. The station was nowhere in sight. As if it had vanished, I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, a trick of fear and exhaustion. But the memory of those black void eyes, of the twisting rails and ghostly whispers, would not fade. That night, I couldn't sleep. My dreams were filled with the station, its shadows, the figure gliding silently. Even in the city, far from Ashwood, I felt watched. And sometimes, when I stepped outside, I could hear faint metallic tapping on distant tracks, a whisper curling through the wind. You cannot leave. The station had marked me, and I knew, no matter how far I ran, it would never release me. The following week, I returned to Ashwood to gather more photos for my project, stupidly thinking I could face the station and prove to myself it was nothing. The town's locals avoided the forest road, giving me uneasy looks. They muttered warnings I barely understood, but I ignored them, convinced it was just legend. I parked near the forest edge, camera in hand. The sun was setting, painting everything in orange and shadow. I stepped toward the old tracks, heart racing. At first, the forest seemed empty, still. Then I saw movement, a shimmer among the trees. The figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, its body unnaturally long, limbs twisting slightly, head cocked to the side. It glided forward silently, and the temperature dropped sharply. My camera clicked instinctively, capturing nothing but shadows. The whispers returned, rising in pitch, overlapping into a chaotic chorus. My stomach knotted with terror. I wanted to turn, to run, but my legs refused. The figure moved closer, almost circling me, gliding with impossible speed, bending reality around the tracks as it advanced. I realized then that the station wasn't just abandoned. It had chosen me, marked me, and now I couldn't escape. I backed away, forcing myself toward the road, but the forest seemed endless. The figure glided closer, its presence warping the space around it. The metallic clatter returned, soft, rhythmic, like distant train wheels. Though no train existed, I stumbled over a hidden root and fell hard. My camera skittered across the gravel. The figure stopped over me, black voids of eyes staring directly into mine. I felt my sanity falter as a whisper slithered into my mind. You belong here. Desperate, I grabbed the camera and swung it in a wide arc, flashing the light across the figure. For a moment, it recoiled, its form dissolving slightly into shadow. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting for the road. Behind me, the forest seemed alive, the trees twisting as if reaching out to grab me. The station's whistle sounded faintly, echoing in the distance. I didn't dare look back. I reached my car and jumped inside, slamming the door. Heart racing, I started the engine. The headlights revealed empty road, no figure, no forest, only faint mist. Relief surged, but it was temporary. As I drove away, the tracks reappeared through the corner of my eye, impossibly bending toward the road. The whispers returned faintly, carried on the wind, repeating, "You cannot leave." I realized the station had never been just a place. It was a sentient trap. The figure, the shadows, the warped tracks, all extensions of the station itself. It fed on fear, drawing me back, claiming me with every heartbeat. I sped through the darkness, praying for distance, but I could still feel its presence, stretching along the tree line like a living shadow. Every road sign, every distant tree seemed distorted, reaching toward me. Even now, the memory haunts me. Every abandoned building, every whispering wind in the woods reminds me that the station waits. And one day, it will find me again. Months later, I stopped photographing abandoned sites altogether. But the dreams never stopped. I see the station, hear the whispers, feel the brush of elongated fingers on my skin. One night, while scrolling through old photos, I noticed something chilling. In every image I had taken of abandoned buildings over the past year, faint shadows lingered in corners, tall, thin shapes, heads tilted unnaturally. They had followed me from the station, claiming a piece of my life. I can never forget that night in Ashwood. The forest, the tracks, the figure, they are part of me now. And if I ever return near those woods, I know the whispers will rise again. Beware abandoned places. Some are not forgotten. They are waiting. And if they find you, escape may not be possible. My name is Alex, and this happened when I was 19. I was camping with friends near Lake Redfern, a small, secluded body of water in upstate New York. The locals avoided it, whispering about how people who stayed too long sometimes disappeared without a trace. Naturally, we laughed it off, until that night. We set up camp on the shore, the water calm and still under a pale moon. Everything seemed peaceful until I noticed the surface of the lake ripple, though there was no wind. My friend Jake scoffed, blaming it on fish or a fallen branch. But I felt it. Something watching. Something beneath the water. Later that night, I woke to silence. The campfire had died, leaving us in near darkness. When I turned toward the lake, I saw a pale figure standing at the water's edge. Its features were blurred, as if the mist itself formed its shape. I blinked, and it was gone. But the sense of being watched didn't fade. Every instinct screamed danger, and yet I felt compelled to look again, drawn to the water by an invisible force. By midnight, the air had grown colder, unnaturally so. The mist over the lake thickened, swirling in patterns that made my skin crawl. My friends were asleep, or at least I thought they were. But I could hear whispers, soft and melodic, coming from the water. I stepped closer to the shoreline, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist. The ripples on the lake grew, forming shapes that resembled human figures. For a moment, I swore I saw someone familiar, my friend Jake. But when I blinked, the image dissolved into fog. Suddenly, the ground beneath me felt unstable. I stumbled, falling toward the water. I screamed, and my friends awoke, panicked. But when they shined flashlights toward the lake, nothing was there. Only a faint silhouette, pale and wavering, lurking at the water's edge. It was then I noticed the oddities along the shore. Footprints leading into the lake, disappearing beneath the water as if someone had walked straight into it. My heart pounded. Whatever haunted Redfern Lake didn't just watch, it took. Panic set in. We retreated to our tents, but sleep was impossible. Every splash, every faint ripple sent jolts of fear through me. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement near my tent. I grabbed my flashlight, heart in my throat, and saw it. A pale, water-soaked figure staring at me. Head tilted unnaturally, black voids where eyes should have been. I froze. The figure didn't speak, didn't move. Yet I felt its awareness, its intent. Behind it, the lake's surface churned, forming shapes that twisted like human bodies trapped beneath. I couldn't breathe. I shook my friends awake. They laughed nervously, trying to rationalize it as fog or hallucination. But the whispers grew louder, circling us, echoing from the lake. Come home. One by one, my friends started walking toward the water, eyes glazed, trance-like. I grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him back, but his body felt weightless, as though the lake itself was tugging at his soul. I realized then that Red Fern Lake didn't just reflect shadows, it devoured them. I fought against the pull, dragging Jake back. The lake hissed softly, as if mocking us. The fog thickened, turning the shoreline into a blur. My flashlight flickered, shadows twisting violently around us. Then, a hand, pale, wet, and impossibly long, emerged from the water, reaching for Jake. He screamed, struggling, but the hand recoiled just long enough for me to yank him backward. My chest burned from exertion, but adrenaline gave me strength. The whispers rose to a cacophony, the surface of the lake bubbling unnaturally. I realized the entire body of water seemed alive, watching, waiting. One misstep, and we would vanish into its depths like so many before us. Desperation took over. I grabbed our remaining gear and pulled my friends toward the forest, ignoring their protests. The fog seemed to follow, drifting across the trees, stretching, curling, trying to reclaim what it had almost lost. We ran until we couldn't hear the whispers, until the lake was a distant shadow behind us. But none of us slept that night. Red Fern Lake doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road, hearts pounding, lungs burning. The fog had thinned slightly, but the oppressive feeling lingered. I kept glancing back at the lake, and though it seemed calm again, I couldn't shake the sense that it had marked us. That night, we camped farther away, but none of us slept. Around 2 a.m., I heard a faint gurgling sound outside the tent. I peeked out, nothing. Then, in the distance, the water of Red Fern Lake glimmered unnaturally, reflecting moonlight like silver knives. A pale silhouette moved across the surface, gliding impossibly fast. I realized that leaving the lake's vicinity didn't break its hold. The whispers returned in dreams, soft at first, then louder, insistent. Return, join us. By morning, the others were jittery, on edge. We vowed never to speak of it again, but the lake had planted seeds of fear deep in our minds. Something ancient and malevolent lived beneath that surface, patient, waiting for the next opportunity to pull us in. Over the next few days, strange things happened. Small items went missing from our campsite. Footprints appeared in the dirt, leading toward the lake but disappearing halfway. Birds avoided the area. Even the wind seemed to carry the whispers. One night, I woke alone, the others asleep. I swore I saw ripples on the lake forming letters, shapes spelling out something urgent. Come back. My pulse raced, and I felt an irresistible pull, as though invisible hands were tugging at my limbs. I fled into the forest, panting. But the whispers followed, curling through the trees. Something moved under the water, just beneath the surface. Too fast, too deliberate. I had never felt such a cold, malevolent presence. something older than the world itself, feeding on fear and curiosity. By dawn, I had convinced myself I'd imagined it. But in my dreams, the lake never let me go. A week later, we returned to the area to pack up for good. The lake appeared calm, deceptively peaceful, but I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. My friends moved silently, tense, eyes darting toward the water. As we gathered our gear, the whispers began, soft at first, then rising in pitch. The water churned violently. A pale figure emerged, tall and thin, limbs twisting unnaturally. Its black void eyes locked onto me. I screamed, trying to grab my friends, but it was too fast. One of them, Emily, froze, eyes glazed. She stepped toward the water, beckoned by the whispers. I lunged to grab her, pulling her back violently. The figure paused, tilting its head, then glided back into the mist. The lake fell silent again, but we knew it had not left. We packed in record time, fear driving us faster than any logic or reason. Redfern Lake had chosen its victims, and we had been lucky. For now, that night, back in town, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my window seemed like whispers. Every shadow seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally. The memory of the figure, gliding silently over the lake, replayed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I scrolled through photos from the trip and froze. In every image of the lake, faint pale shapes lingered in the background, barely visible but undeniably there. I hadn't noticed them before. The lake had followed me, lingering in the corners of my memory and on film. When I closed my eyes, I could feel it. Something ancient, patient, waiting for me to return. I realized then that no distance would protect me. Redfern Lake didn't care about geography. It didn't care about logic. It only cared about claiming what it wanted. Weeks later, a local newspaper reported a camper missing near Redfern Lake. Details were vague, but the description matched Emily. I called frantically, but no one had seen her. I hadn't even mentioned her disappearance publicly. That night, I heard a whisper through my bedroom window, soft and deliberate. "Come home." My heart stopped. I couldn't see anyone, but the presence was unmistakable. I realized with horror that Redfern Lake had extended its reach beyond its shores. It didn't need proximity. It only needed attention, acknowledgement. Every memory of it, every thought about it, made it stronger. I shut the windows and tried to sleep, but I knew it was waiting. Patient, relentless, ancient. I never returned to Redfern Lake, and I warn anyone who hears about it. Stay away. It doesn't forgive curiosity, and it doesn't forget. The pale figures, the whispers, the rippling water, they are patient, timeless, and hungry. Even now, months later, I feel its pull. When the wind carries a strange scent of cold water and mist, I freeze, terrified that the lake has found me again. Redfern Lake claims what it wants, and one day, if you dare venture near it, it may claim you. Some places aren't abandoned. They're alive, and some waters hide monsters older than humanity itself. My name is Claire, and this happened when I was 18. I had just moved into my grandmother's old house in a small town in Maine. It was a quaint, quiet place, or at least it seemed that way. The locals warned me about the house, saying strange things happened there. But I brushed it off. The first week was uneventful, until I noticed the basement door. It was old, wooden, and locked tight with a rusty padlock. My grandmother said it was just old storage, nothing of importance, and that I shouldn't go down there. But something about that door drew me in, like a whisper I couldn't ignore. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. I found an old key hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace. My hands shook as I inserted it into the lock. The padlock clicked open, cold metal scraping against the door. As I slowly opened the door, a musty, damp smell hit me. The stairs descended into darkness, swallowing the light from the hallway. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. And then I heard it, a faint scratching, coming from the far corner of the basement. I stepped cautiously into the basement, my flashlight casting narrow beams across cracked concrete and stacks of old boxes. The scratching grew louder, irregular, almost deliberate, echoing off the damp walls. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear. Then I saw it. Shadows moving along the far wall, twisting unnaturally. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. But the shapes began to separate, forming something humanoid. I could see long, thin fingers reaching out from the darkness, scratching at the floor. A cold chill ran down my spine. The air felt thick, almost viscous, pressing against my skin. I wanted to run, but my curiosity rooted me in place. I shone the flashlight directly at the figure. For a brief second, I saw a pale face, hollow eyes, and a mouth twisted in a silent scream. Then it vanished, leaving only the echo of scratching. My heart pounded as I realized I wasn't alone. The basement wasn't empty. Something had been living down there, watching, waiting, feeding on the silence and darkness. I stumbled backward, tripping over a loose board. The scratching grew frantic, surrounding me from all sides. My flashlight flickered, casting grotesque shadows across the walls. I could feel something breathing, cold and heavy, close to my skin. I called out, my voice shaking, but there was no answer. Only the sound of shifting shadows. Then, one of the boxes toppled over by itself, revealing a small trapdoor embedded in the floor. Something about it drew me in, though fear screamed to leave. I lifted the trapdoor, revealing a narrow crawl space descending into total darkness. A foul, metallic smell rose from below. The scratching came from there, now faster, more urgent. I realized the basement had levels I wasn't supposed to see. Something lived beneath the house, something ancient, something patient. I wanted to leave, but the compulsion to look deeper was overwhelming. I slid into the crawl space, flashlight trembling in my hand, every nerve on fire. The crawl space was tight, claustrophobic, and suffocating. Every movement kicked up dust, making it hard to breathe. The scratching was louder now, accompanied by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the wooden floor above. I pressed forward, flashlight illuminating the walls. Strange symbols, carved and scratched into the stone, glowed faintly in the beam. I felt a presence watching, waiting. The temperature dropped suddenly, and frost formed on the walls, though it was summer outside. Then I saw it. Another figure, smaller than the one above, crouched in the shadows. Its skin was pale and slimy, fingers ending in sharp, black nails. It hissed at me, a sound like metal scraping stone, and I stumbled backward in terror. I realized the basement wasn't just haunted. It was alive. The house itself had become a cage, feeding, shaping the darkness, creating these creatures from shadow and fear. I needed to escape, but every step seemed to bring me deeper. I forced myself to move deeper into the crawl space, the low ceiling pressing down on me. The humming grew louder, vibrating through my skull. The air was thick with a metallic, wet stench, making my stomach churn. Then I saw them. Several small, pale figures emerging from the shadows. Their eyes were hollow, mouths twisted in silent screams. They circled me, moving unnaturally fast, yet silently, like shadows with intent. My flashlight flickered, illuminating glimpses of claws and glistening skin. I stumbled over an exposed pipe, screaming. One of the figures lunged, but it passed through me like mist, chilling me to the bone. I realized they weren't entirely physical. They were a manifestation of something darker, feeding on fear. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse, almost alive, and the floor beneath me trembled. I felt the house itself reacting, aware of my intrusion. I had trespassed into a living nightmare, and the basement would not let me leave unscathed. Desperation surged through me. I scrambled backward, flashlight swinging wildly. The figures advanced, their shapes blending with the shadows. Every step I took seemed to drag me deeper, as though the basement itself had hands gripping my legs. I spotted the stairs above, the exit. Adrenaline gave me strength. I bolted upward, nearly falling over boxes and debris. The scratching and humming crescendoed, echoing around me, filling every corner of the basement with a suffocating presence. When I burst into the hallway, gasping, I slammed the basement door shut. The padlock rattled violently, as though something behind it wanted out. I fumbled with the key and locked it tight. Silence fell, broken only by my ragged breaths. But I knew it wasn't over. The house had awakened, and whatever lived below would not forget my intrusion. Its hunger was patient, its presence eternal. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the old house made my heart race. At midnight, I heard the scratching again, coming from beneath the locked basement door. I tried to rationalize it. Old pipes, rats. But the sound was deliberate, intelligent. Then I heard a whisper, low and hissing. You shouldn't have seen. My blood ran cold. The next morning, I found deep scratches across the wooden floor in front of the door, marks that hadn't been there before. Faint, wet footprints led toward my bedroom. I realized the basement wasn't confined. It could extend its influence into the house itself, creeping, claiming space. I packed a bag and left, vowing never to return. But as I drove away, I could still hear faint scratching echoing in my mind like a heartbeat, reminding me the basement never forgets, and it never forgives. Weeks later, I returned briefly to collect more belongings, but the house seemed aware. Doors creaked on their own. Shadows moved against the light. The basement door was locked, yet I felt a pull toward it, as if calling me back. The padlock rattled without cause. Whispers filled the empty halls, insistent, seductive. Come home. Come see. I felt an icy grip on my arm, but no one was there. My camera captured nothing, yet I could see faint figures in the corner of my eye, half shadow, half real, watching, waiting. I realized the house itself was sentient, feeding off curiosity and fear. The basement had created a world of darkness below it, and I had glimpsed only the surface. Some doors should never be opened, some depths never explored. At night, even miles away, I hear it. Scratching, faint but deliberate, echoing through the walls of my new apartment. Dreams torment me. Endless corridors, shifting staircases, pale figures with hollow eyes emerging from darkness. I cannot forget. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, feel them, hear them. The basement had imprinted itself into my mind, leaving a permanent mark. I am never truly safe. The house follows me through memories, shadows, and whispers. I warn you, curiosity can awaken what sleeps beneath. Some doors are locked for a reason. Some basements are not empty. They are alive, patient, and hungry. I never returned to that town. I never stepped foot inside that house again. But sometimes, I hear faint scratching from beneath doors, or catch shadows moving unnaturally at the corner of my vision. The basement waits. It will never forget me, and it will never forgive. And if you ever find an old locked door in a quiet house, remember this. Curiosity is a key that can open doors to things that hunger, things older than reason, things that are very much alive. Some basements are not just rooms, they are gateways. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. My name is Ryan, and this happened when I was 21. I had always loved hiking, especially in the dense woods surrounding my hometown in Vermont. People warned me about those forests, stories of disappearances, strange lights, and eerie sounds. But I didn't believe them. One autumn evening, I decided to hike deeper than usual. The sun was setting, painting the forest in warm golds and reds. Birds chirped their last songs, and a crisp wind rustled the leaves. It felt peaceful at first, almost too peaceful. I noticed footprints along the trail, human but oddly spaced, as if the person was walking in a strange, uneven rhythm. I called out, but no one answered. The forest grew quieter, unnaturally so, like it was holding its breath. Then I saw him. A tall man, dressed in tattered clothes, standing perfectly still between two trees. His face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel his gaze, piercing, heavy, and unblinking. I froze, unsure whether to run or stay. The man tilted his head slowly, and I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Something about him was wrong. I tried to keep calm, taking a few cautious steps backward. The man didn't move, yet I felt his attention pinned to me, suffocating and inescapable. The footprints on the trail ahead seemed to grow larger, spreading in every direction like a warning. I reached for my phone, intending to call someone, but there was no signal. Panic set in. The forest, once comforting, now seemed alive. Branches scraping like fingers, shadows twisting unnaturally. Suddenly, the stranger took a step forward. He moved with an eerie grace, too slow to be natural, yet impossibly fast in certain moments. My heart hammered as I stumbled backward, tripping over roots. His face remained hidden, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze, like heat burning through the chill of the evening. A low, guttural whisper echoed through the trees. "You shouldn't be here." My legs burned as I ran blindly, darting between the trees. The stranger didn't chase like a human would. He glided, appearing closer every time I looked back, yet never breaking the shadows. I realized I wasn't just lost. I was being hunted by something that wasn't entirely human. I scrambled over a small hill, hoping for an open clearing, but the forest seemed endless. Every direction looked the same, and the stranger always appeared just ahead, waiting, patient. The whispers grew louder, now multiple voices, overlapping. "Stay, forever." My flashlight, which I had turned on to guide me, flickered and dimmed. Shadows stretched toward me, unnaturally long and crawling across the ground. I felt hands brush my shoulders, though when I spun around, no one was there. Then I saw something that froze me in place. A circle of figures, pale, motionless, partially hidden in the trees, forming a ring around me. Their faces were featureless, eyes black voids. The stranger stood at the center, taller than the rest, exuding a presence that made my stomach churn. I tried to speak, to call out for help, but my voice caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet my legs refused to obey. The forest had trapped me, the stranger controlling every shadow, every movement, every breath. I finally managed to stumble backward, breaking through the circle. The figures didn't pursue, they just watched, swaying slightly as though suspended between reality and shadow. The stranger moved with a circle, emerging from behind trees, silently following every step. Branches clawed at my face and arms as I ran blindly. My flashlight finally died, plunging me into complete darkness. The whispers became a cacophony, echoing in my mind rather than my ears. "You belong here, with us." I tripped and fell into a shallow ravine. Cold mud clung to me as I crawled toward a dim patch of fading light. Glancing up, I saw the stranger standing at the edge of the trees, unblinking, perfectly still, yet terrifyingly close. Every instinct screamed to escape, yet the forest itself seemed to resist me, reshaping its paths, twisting trails, and drawing me back toward the figure. I realized then that this wasn't just a man in the woods. It was something that owned the forest, feeding on fear, curiosity, and isolation. I scrambled out of the ravine, mud dripping from my clothes. The light of dusk was fading fast, leaving the forest in an almost supernatural darkness. My lungs burned as I ran, but every direction seemed unfamiliar. The trees shifted slightly with each glance, reshaping paths, blocking any chance of escape. The stranger appeared again, gliding silently between the trunks. This time, I saw him clearly. Pale skin stretched over sharp bones, eyes black as obsidian, and a crooked grin that made my stomach twist. He didn't chase me like a predator. Instead, he toyed with me, always just ahead, always watching, making me doubt my own sanity. Branches whipped across my face, roots clawed at my feet, yet I forced myself to run. Every sound, the whispering wind, cracking twigs, distant animal calls, was amplified by the stranger's presence. I felt as though the forest itself had become his ally, bending and twisting to keep me within his domain. By the time I reached a small creek, I thought I saw an opening, a way back to the main trail. But then I noticed movement. Shadows flitting across the water, forming humanoid shapes that mirrored the stranger's own posture. My heart sank. The forest had claimed me, and he had only just begun. I decided to hide near the creek, crouching behind a fallen log, hoping the shadows would miss me. Every muscle tensed, every nerve screaming. The whispers began again, louder, almost directly in my mind. "You cannot leave. You belong." My flashlight lay broken beside me, useless. The last rays of sunlight faded, plunging the forest into an unnatural darkness. Then I saw them, pale, faceless figures emerging silently from the shadows, moving toward the creek like water itself. Their movements were fluid and unnerving, gliding over rocks, mud, and roots without a sound. The stranger stepped forward, taller than ever in the dim light, the crooked grin widening. He raised a hand, and the faceless figures froze instantly. I realized they were under his control, extensions of him, manifestations of his power over the forest. I couldn't think. Every instinct screamed to run, but the ground itself seemed to shift, closing off any possible escape. I understood then that the forest didn't just contain the stranger, it was him, or he was it. I bolted, plunging into the creek. Cold water shocked my system, but I ran, slipping on stones, crashing through undergrowth. The faceless figures didn't follow, but the stranger did, gliding along the bank, uncatchable, always in my peripheral vision. I stumbled onto a muddy trail leading uphill. The forest seemed to twist around me, paths bending back toward the stranger, trying to draw me in. I could hear whispers following me, carrying an almost tangible weight. My mind felt trapped in their echo, and fear clawed at every thought. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind me. I turned, and the stranger was closer than ever, moving impossibly fast. I screamed, running blindly, falling multiple times, my hands scraping on roots and rocks. But he didn't chase me like a human. He toyed with me, making me believe I might escape before drawing me back. By the time I reached a clearing, the shadows had disappeared. I collapsed, gasping, heart hammering. Yet I knew this relief was temporary. He hadn't left. He never would. I spent the night in the clearing, shivering under a tree, too terrified to sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl sent shivers through my body. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly around me, infinite and oppressive. At dawn, I tried to retrace my steps, but the trail was gone. Every landmark was unrecognizable, as if the forest had moved overnight. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the morning mist. And then I saw it. The stranger standing atop a ridge, watching, arms crossed, perfectly still. I froze, heart pounding. He didn't move, yet I felt his gaze slice through me. The faceless figures emerged behind him, appearing at the edges of my vision, silently surrounding the clearing. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent. "You belong here." I realized with horror that the forest itself was alive, bound to him, and he could control it. I had wandered into a place that had rules I didn't understand, and any attempt to leave would feed him. Desperation drove me to climb a small hill, hoping for the road I had entered from. But the forest had changed again, the familiar path gone, replaced by dense thickets and shadows that seemed to move on their own. The stranger appeared before me suddenly, silent, blocking my path. His grin widened, unnatural, and I realized he'd been waiting, watching every step I had taken. He raised a hand slowly, and the faceless figures appeared behind him, forming a wall of pale, blank faces. Fear froze me. I understood then. Escape was impossible. The forest belonged to him, and he belonged to it. My curiosity had lured me here, and now I was trapped, prey to something ancient and patient. He whispered softly, and the trees seemed to lean closer. Forever. My mind reeled, trying to fight the pull, but it was too late. I never escaped the forest that day. By some miracle, or perhaps because he allowed it, I stumbled out near the edge of town, but I was changed. I could still hear the whispers at night, feel shadows stretching toward me in empty rooms. The stranger waits in the woods, patient, watching, always just out of sight. And I know that one day, if I or anyone else returns, the forest will claim us. His hunger is eternal, his patience infinite. I warn you, if you ever hike in those woods and you see a shadow between the trees, a crooked grin beneath tattered clothing, do not follow. Do not look. Do not think you can escape. Some forests are alive, and some strangers are far older and hungrier than you could ever imagine. My name is Laura, and this happened when I was 19. I had just moved to a quiet, sleepy town in New Hampshire, drawn by the promise of peace and solitude. Everything seemed normal at first. Charming houses, friendly neighbors, and long streets lined with maple trees. One evening, I was walking home late from work. The street was unusually empty, the air heavy with fog. I noticed something strange. The houses at the end of the street looked off. Their windows were dark, almost too dark, and the shapes seemed slightly distorted, as if warped by some invisible hand. Curiosity got the better of me. I kept walking, but with each step, the street seemed to stretch unnaturally, houses elongating and shadows deepening. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to turn back, but the path I came from seemed to vanish behind a thick layer of fog. Then I heard it, a faint whisper carried on the wind. You shouldn't be here." The sound came from the very end of the street, where the shadows were thickest. My heart pounded as I realized this was no ordinary street. Something lived here, waiting for the unwary. I slowed my pace, heart hammering, but the fog thickened around me, swallowing the street behind me. Every step felt heavier, like I was moving through water. The houses loomed taller, their windows dark voids that seemed to watch me. I tried calling my roommate, but my phone showed no signal. The whispers grew louder, repeating in a chorus, "You shouldn't be here. You belong." I spun around, but the street behind me had disappeared completely. In its place was only a wall of dense fog, twisting and moving as if alive. Panic set in. I ran forward, hoping to reach the end, but the street stretched farther than it should have. Shadows moved unnaturally along the houses, stretching, twisting, forming shapes that resembled people, but with impossible, elongated limbs. Then I noticed something terrifying. A single figure at the far end, barely visible through the fog. It stood perfectly still, facing me, and yet I could feel its gaze penetrate me, cold and endless. My instinct screamed to turn back, but there was nowhere to go. I stumbled forward, my shoes slipping on wet asphalt. The fog thickened, wrapping around me like a living thing, damp and suffocating. The street seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting in directions that defied logic. I noticed the figure was closer now, moving silently, almost floating. Its face was obscured, but the presence was unbearable. A weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The whispers intensified, overlapping in an unholy chorus. "You belong. You belong." I tried to escape into an alley, but the alley twisted unnaturally, leading me back to the same street. No matter where I turned, I was trapped. The houses stretched, walls bending, windows forming dark eyes. Something was reshaping reality around me, controlling every step. Then I saw other figures emerging from the fog, pale, faceless, humanoid shapes. They didn't move like humans. They glided, silent, their gaze fixed on me. The street wasn't just a street. It was a cage, a hunting ground, and I was the prey. Desperation surged through me. I ran blindly, dodging the faceless figures, but the street warped beneath my feet. Houses twisted, doors appearing where walls should be, staircases leading nowhere. My mind reeled. Was this real? Or had the street trapped me in some nightmare? I glanced back and saw the central figure advancing with impossible speed, its shadow stretching over multiple houses at once. The faceless ones followed in perfect formation, silent and patient. Each breath I took felt stolen, the fog thickening around my throat. My flashlight flickered weakly, barely cutting through the mist. I noticed something carved into the asphalt. Strange symbols, glowing faintly. They pulsed like a heartbeat, as if the street itself was alive, feeding on my fear. The figure raised a hand, and the fog parted briefly. I caught a glimpse of its face, pale, distorted, with a grin that stretched too wide to be human. I screamed, realizing there might be no escape. I sprinted down the street, trying to ignore the tightening fog and the eerie whispers echoing in my ears. Every step I took seemed to stretch the distance ahead, the street elongating like some twisted, living thing. The faceless figures glided behind me, perfectly silent, their presence oppressive. The central figure moved faster than possible, appearing closer with each glance. My flashlight flickered, casting shadows that danced and contorted on the warped houses. I stumbled over a cracked sidewalk and fell, scraping my hands on wet asphalt. I looked up, and the figure was towering over me, impossibly tall, its distorted grin wider than before. It didn't speak, but the air around me vibrated with a malevolent energy. I could feel the street pulsing beneath me, alive, controlling the very ground I ran on. I realized with horror that this was no ordinary street. The fog, the figures, the warped houses, they were all extensions of this being, a predator feeding on fear. My only option was to keep running, even if the street itself refused to let me leave. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly, the fog twisting around me like a living creature. Every turn seemed to lead me back to the same spot, the street reshaping itself, bending reality. The whispers now spoke directly into my mind. Forever. You belong here. Branches of warped trees reached toward me from the sidewalks like grasping hands. Shadows stretched unnaturally, crawling along walls and windows. The faceless figures mirrored my movements, gliding closer with every step. Suddenly, the central figure raised an arm, and the street itself rippled like water. Pavement shifted, buildings bent, and I realized that the entire environment was a trap. Escape was impossible. I could only run in endless circles, feeding its amusement. Panic overwhelmed me. My chest burned, my lungs ached, but the street didn't let up. I understood then that this place had no rules but its own, and the stranger controlled every shadow, every movement, every heartbeat. I reached a narrow alley, hoping to hide, but it stretched unnaturally long, leading me deeper into the street's labyrinth. The whispering chorus intensified, overlapping in my mind. You cannot leave. Forever. The faceless figures multiplied, their blank faces reflecting nothing yet radiating pure malice. The central figure appeared closer, grinning impossibly wide. The fog swirled violently around us, forming shapes that seemed alive. My mind struggled to comprehend reality as the street bent impossibly, looping back on itself. I tripped and fell into a puddle, water reflecting the central figure's pale, twisted face. My scream echoed unnaturally, swallowed by the fog. I realized this street wasn't just haunted, it was sentient, and it had chosen me. My fear fed it, and the longer I resisted, the more alive it became. The stranger's grin deepened as I struggled to my feet, knowing the endgame was near. Desperation clawed at me. I ran blindly, slipping and stumbling over warped streets. Every exit I tried vanished, replaced by walls or dense fog. The whispers in my mind became a deafening chorus, commanding me to stop, to surrender, to join the street forever. The central figure glided beside me now, impossibly fast, its grin stretching wider with each heartbeat. Its faceless minions surrounded me, forming a circle. The fog thickened, shaping into limbs and faces, reaching out for me. I tripped again, scraping my palms on sharp stones. I felt hands, real or imagined, grip my shoulders, pulling me toward the figures. The street itself seemed to pulse, bending to hold me in place. I realized with utter horror that I wasn't running from them. I was running for them, being led deeper into the trap. The street opened into a courtyard I hadn't noticed before, paved with dark stones etched with glowing symbols. The central figure waited in the center, arms outstretched, faceless figures forming a perfect ring around him. The symbols pulsed with an unholy light, and the whispers became a chant. I tried to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The fog pressed against my chest, and the symbols on the ground seemed to tether me, feeding my fear into the central figure's will. His grin stretched impossibly, almost splitting his face. Suddenly, the faceless figures moved in unison, surrounding me, their blank faces reflecting my terror. I screamed, realizing I would never leave. The street had claimed me. and now I belong to it. The stranger's voice, cold and infinite, whispered into my mind, "Welcome home. You've always been ours." I woke up later in my apartment, gasping, covered in sweat. But something was wrong. The fog had followed me, curling around the corners of my room. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, and on my phone, a new photo, taken while I was asleep, showed me standing on the vanishing street, surrounded by the faceless figures, the central figure grinning behind me. I realized then that the street didn't just exist in that town. It existed wherever fear, curiosity, and solitude intersected. I could never escape it. It had claimed a piece of me, and I was now tethered forever. Some streets are not meant to be walked. Some streets vanish into themselves, and some strangers, pale and grinning, will wait, patient, hungry, and eternal. As the fog of these small towns settles once more, we are reminded that terror isn't always in the shadows. It can lurk in quiet streets, dense forests, and places we think are safe. Each story tonight showed us that curiosity, isolation, and fear are the doors to something far darker than we can imagine. From the silent hunters in the woods to the vanishing streets and faceless strangers, the horrors we explored are not just tales. They are warnings. These small towns hide secrets, and sometimes those secrets watch us long after we leave. If there's one thing tonight has proven, it's this: fear is eternal, patience is endless, and some places, some beings, will always wait for the next unsuspecting soul to wander too close. Thank you for joining the Dark Fears family on this journey into the most disturbing corners of small-town horror. Stay vigilant, trust your instincts, and never underestimate what hides behind familiar doors and quiet streets. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and like the video so you'll never miss another chilling tale from Dark Fears. Until next time, keep your lights on and keep your eyes open. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.